Okay, thank you, Trevor. I am thankful for the opportunity to present a paper at this important conference. It's good to meet in person, at least virtually. Helen Painter, with whom I have been involved in various Facebook conversations. It's good to see Lisa Ray Beal, who is actually one of my former students and of whom I'm extremely proud, and a student who has far outstripped the teacher. And it is wonderful to be involved in this conference and to have heard so many excellent papers from both established and emerging scholars. And I'm very honored to be able to add my contribution to the discussion. Now, my topic is the message of the prophets, peace through violence, as Trevor emphasized with the question mark. And here are the four things I hope to do in the time allotted. First, I want to say a word about the whole idea of violence in the Bible. Then, second and third, I want to look at two texts in the book of Isaiah in chapters 9 and 11. And then, number four, and frankly, I don't think I have a snowball's chance in Hades of getting there, but then to mention a few implications for our understanding of other peace texts in the Old Testament, as well as implications for our understanding of the New Testament. So hopefully we maybe cover some of those in the questions. So on to the first point. When we use the word violence with regard to God, I think it is important to point out that we are in large measure engaging in a concession to the way in which the word violence is used today. Today, violence seems to refer to any action involving physical force, whether or not there is any legitimate justification for that use of force. So criminals may be said to be violent in their commission of particular crimes, and law enforcement agencies may be said to be engaging in violence in their apprehension, incarceration, or execution of those criminals. In war, aggressor nations are said to be violent, but nations that use weaponry and the military in defense of their people or territory are also regarded as engaging in violence. So I believe it is important to note that this is not the way the Hebrew Bible speaks of violence with regard either to God, for those who were involved in the use of force against lawbreakers, or to persons or nations that are engaged in legitimately authorized military activity. I realize that raises questions, but nevertheless, the word in the Hebrew Bible that is most often translated as violence or violent in our English Bibles is the word Hamas, and I have it there for you on the screen. And as you can see from the slide, it is never used of God, at least with regard to actions against persons. You do have that one exception in Lamentations 2:6. And as far as the noun is concerned, it's never used of God at all. Violence in the Bible is only attributed to those who were wicked and who oppress those who are righteous and or innocent. So my point is that while we may talk about divine violence as a concession to how the word is conventionally used today, as far as the Hebrew Bible is concerned, it would be oxymoronic to call God violent. It would be the equivalent of referring to him as wicked or unholy. Now, let's go to the first text in Isaiah 9. This is, of course, one of our favorite Old Testament Christmas texts, and one that is very familiar to us from its usage in Handel's Messiah. It is one that, along with other peace texts, is used in large measure idyllically or romantically with regard to what is considered to be the Old Testament's vision for peace. But I'm going to argue that this cannot be quite substantiated, at least not in the way in which it is usually done, with popular phrases or slogans like, "You can't fight violence with violence," or "Peace cannot be established by violent means," or that might does not make right. The people of Judah and even northern Israel, who have been oppressed and subjected to gloom and darkness, are given a vision in Isaiah 9, 1-7, of how their situation is going to be reversed. A great light will dawn on them. They will be given cause for great rejoicing. There will be a wonderful time of peace that will come on them. But that peace will come on account of how their God will, by means of violence, bring about their deliverance. Now, there is already a hint of this in verse 3, when we are told that the people will rejoice as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. Now, of course, this is put in analogical terms. Nevertheless, it seems that this still anticipates what is yet to come in the passage, as Patricia Toll argues in her Isaiah commentary. In verse 4, we are told that Yahweh had shattered the yoke that burdens them. And the text says specifically that the Lord did this as in the days of Midian's defeat. Now, the occasion being remembered here is that of Gideon's victory over the Midianites narrated in Judges 6-8. Some important passages to call attention to from that narrative are the following. In Judges 6:16, when Yahweh tells Gideon, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. And then in 7:25, they also captured two of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb and Zeb or Zeev at the wine press of Zeb. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon. And then in 8:10, we read that 120,000 swordsmen of the Midianites had fallen. And even after that, a good number of the Midianites' remaining troops, some 15,000 men, were either killed or captured. What is also important to recall from this account is that at the conclusion of the narrative in Judges 8:28, we read this: Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace 40 years. Peace has come about through divinely commanded and executed violence. After this recall of the Midian narrative and how the current day Judahites and Israelites will be rescued from their oppression, the Isaiah text goes on to describe how every warrior's boot in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning and will be fuel for the fire. Now, popularly, this is often understood to be referring to all warriors' boots and all warriors' clothes. However, contextually, it makes much more sense to understand that what is being referred to specifically are the boots and clothing of the enemy oppressor army. The scene is comparable to that found in Ezekiel 39, where after describing the defeat of Gog and Magog, the text goes on to state this: Then those who live in the towns of Israel will go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up, the small and large shields, the bows and arrows, the war clubs and spears. For 7 years, they will use them for fuel. They will not need to gather wood from the fields or cut it from the forests, because they will use the weapons for fuel. And they will plunder those who plundered them, and loot those who looted them, declares the sovereign Lord. So that plunder theme kind of works in Isaiah 9. Isaiah goes on to announce that to us a child is born, to us a son is given. And he then gives us a series of names by which this child will be called. Now, there are various details that cannot detain us here. Who is this child? Is this an actual birth announcement, or is it perhaps referring to a royal coronation ceremony for a full-grown adult child? Are these names that describe the child or the newly installed king, or are they names that actually describe God and not the king? Are there 4 of these names, or are there actually 5 names corresponding to Egyptian royal installation ceremonies? And is this simply an individual list of names, or do the names together constitute one or more sentences? We will have to confine ourselves to simply looking at the meaning of the names. First, the child will be called Pele-Yoetz. Now, on the slide, you will see some of the various ways in which translators have rendered this phrase. I certainly lean heavily toward the last two suggestions on this slide. This is not about how this one who will sit on David's throne will be a good counselor or dispenser of advice, a royal Dr. Phil, or a psychotherapist. Rather, it is about the fact that this figure will make marvelous plans. To put that more pointedly, he will be a brilliant military strategist. He will not need anyone to give him advice as to how to carry out warfare. He will not need a Secretary of War, a Minister of Defense, a ministerial cabinet, or a group of trusted advisors. And even if he did have people filling these positions, he would not really need them. The story is told that during the American Civil War, President Lincoln had a meeting with his cabinet during which he proposed a certain military action which he wanted his army to initiate. He then went around the room to get his cabinet secretary's opinions. Every one of them registered their opposition to the president's proposal. Lincoln then summed up the situation. 7 nays, 1 aye. The ayes have it. So the connotations raised by the word counselor are really misleading. It is not referring to the figure in this chapter as one who counsels others. Rather, it describes one who needs no counsel. He is his own counselor. He is his own military strategist. Next, this figure is given the name of El Gabor. Now, I believe the translation mighty God works well here, but I also believe that warrior God captures what it means for this God to be one who is a mighty God. He will use that strength to free his people from their oppressors, to subdue the nations, and to rule his kingdom in providing safety and security. These first two names then actually work together. The king who will sit on David's throne, or the deity whom this king represents, is not only a brilliant military strategist, but he also has the power and the might to carry out those strategies. Now, just to complete the name survey, note very quickly that the third name, Aviad, is usually translated as something like everlasting father. And this is probably almost certainly correct, although there have been quite a number of scholars who have proposed the meaning father of plunder, referring to the king or god as someone who receives the plunder and then perhaps also distributes it to his people. And then, just to make sure that you know that I do believe in peace, I'll put on this other last slide as well, Sar Shalom. Either this figure on the throne or God himself is Prince of Peace. But seriously, this text is indeed pointing to a time of great peace, a peace that will never end. But it is not saying that the peace comes about by peaceful means. It comes about because the master military strategist, the mighty God, defeats the oppressors of his people by his counsel and by his might. Interestingly, for me, a somewhat surprising ally in my understanding of this passage is Walter Brueggemann. And I'll go back there before I finish. Brueggemann says this: the transformation to be wrought in this passage is a vigorous military one. The expected and welcome defeat is not a spiritual or religious or nice one. It is brutal military activity whereby the equipment of the enemy soldiers, all bloodied in the much killing, is burned as an act not only of elimination of weapons, but also of gloating and consequent humiliation of the enemy. Through a historical agent, Yahweh will terminate the hated empire in a violent, forcible way. Now, I want to go on now to the second passage, Isaiah 11, 1 to 16. In Isaiah 11, we have another Christmas passage which lies behind my favorite Christmas carol, Lo, how a rose ere blooming. The shoot from the stump of Jesse will arise, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit is described in three couplets. It is the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, it is the Spirit of counsel and power, and it is the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. Now, what is not so well recognized is that these three couplets relate respectively to the next few verses. I'm sorry, I should have had that up before, sorry. So going on to the next passage here, for wisdom and understanding, that couplet, this corresponds perfectly to what is needed with regard to the administration of justice, especially for the poor and the needy of the earth. He will not judge these cases based merely on appearances and hearsay, but he will do so with perfect wisdom and perfect discernment. For the second pair of words, Eitza Ugavora, these are the words which we have already seen cognate forms for in Isaiah 9. Eitza, counsel, is cognate to the noun yoetz. And the word Gevurah, might, is cognate to the noun Gabor. These two nouns in Isaiah 9 were counselor, or as I argue, strategist, and mighty. And this is confirmed later, by the way, in Isaiah 36, 4-5. The Rav Shakeh said to them, say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you base this confidence of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy, Eitza, and power, Gevurah, for war? So this pair of words in Isaiah works together to describe one who has the strategy and the might to carry out military activity. And so sure enough, the next passage there is, he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, with the breath of his lips, he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. So even as wisdom and understanding control the previous part of this passage, now counsel and power override or sort of govern this passage here in 11, 4b-5. And then finally, the knowledge and the fear of the Lord, that spirit of knowledge and fear culminates in what happens in the next passage, where the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, it is this spirit of strategy and might which endows the shoot from the stump of Jesse to carry out warfare against his enemies, to strike them with the rod of his mouth and the breath of his lips. This reference to the rod of his mouth and the breath of his lips should not be spiritualized into something benign, or as even some have tried to do, into the preaching of the gospel. These are words of divine decree that will accomplish their goal. Just like we have in Jeremiah 23:29. Is not my word like fire, declares the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces? The third pair of words then, knowledge and fear of the Lord, are tied to the last line of the section, verses 6-9, with regard to the whole earth being filled with the knowledge of the Lord. Now, what we have not done yet is read that famous description of the peaceable kingdom in verses 6-9. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, the young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den. The young child will put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. This will indeed be a peaceable kingdom, but the text indicates that it does not come about by peaceable means. It comes about because the shoot from the stump of Jesse is inhabited by the Spirit of the Lord, a spirit of counsel and power, extraordinary military strategy and might, which enables him to deliver his people from oppression. And notice what happens militarily in the entire passage. He strikes the earth with the rod of his mouth. He slays the wicked with the breath of his lips. He is girded for war with his belt and sash. He will reclaim his people from the ends of the earth. Judah and Israel will again be one. They will swoop down on Philistia. They will plunder their former oppressors to the east. They will subdue Edom and Moab and Ammon. Their enemies will be destroyed. So, interestingly, I think Brevard Childs sums my passage up very well. He says, for the prophet Isaiah, the coming, and not the fulfillment, but the coming of the Messianic age is not construed as one of heavenly sweetness and light. Rather, the attributes of counsel and might in governing are exercised in forcefully constraining the wicked and adroitly discerning both the good and the evil of human society. Now, I am also a good prophet, and I correctly prophesied that I would not get to my last point, and this is correct. So maybe we can cover that in the question period.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shepard, for that illuminating treatment of those two chapters in Isaiah. Yes, I'm confident that we'll have some questions about the implications looking even forward in the canon for the work that you've proposed here. Our